Hello, everyone, and welcome to Midnight Whispers. I know many of you listen to these stories to relax and slowly fall asleep. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from tonight. If you enjoy these stories, please like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's begin. About 10 years ago, I lived in a house that was already a century old. 100 years of people coming and going, lives lived, arguments had, quiet nights, loud ones, births, deaths, and everything in between. At the time, I didn't think much about the age of the place. Old houses have character. They creak, they shift, they make noises you learn to live with. I wasn't someone who went around looking for ghosts, and I didn't move and expecting anything strange to happen. For a while, life there was completely normal. Most days, it was just me and my dog at home. She was a lab and German shepherd mix, smart, alert, and deeply attached to me. She was the kind of dog that followed you everywhere. If I got up from the couch, she got up too. If I went to another room, she was right behind me. She hated closed doors and didn't like being separated from her people for even a moment. Wherever I was, she wanted to be. One afternoon, I went down to the basement to do laundry. The basement was unfinished, like many in old houses. Concrete floors, exposed beams, low lighting, and a section that was clearly older than the rest, with darker stone walls and a colder feel to it. It wasn't a place I loved spending time in, but it wasn't terrifying either. Just old. As usual, my dog followed me down the stairs. She wandered off toward the older part of the basement while I bent down in front of the dryer, pulling clothes out and tossing them into a basket. Everything felt quiet and ordinary. The washing machine hummed softly, and the light overhead buzzed faintly. Then, without any warning at all, my dog bolted. She didn't just walk away or trot back toward the stairs. She ran full speed, nails scrambling against the concrete, body low, tail tucked. She flew past me and shot up the basement stairs like something was chasing her. The sound of her paws hitting the steps was frantic and loud, and then she was gone. I froze. I hadn't heard anything. No bang, no footsteps, no sudden noise that might have startled her. I stood there for a second, heart racing, listening hard, expecting something else to happen. The basement was silent except for the dryer. That's when the unease hit. I followed her upstairs quickly, not running, but definitely not taking my time. When I reached the top, she was standing in the kitchen, tense and alert, staring toward the basement door. Her ears were up, her body stiff, and her eyes were locked on the dark space below. She didn't look confused. She looked afraid. I called her name. She didn't move. I tried to laugh it off, telling myself she probably smelled something weird or startled herself. Dogs do strange things sometimes, but deep down, I knew this was different. I had lived with this dog for years. I knew her behavior. She had never reacted like that to anything before. After that day, something changed. No matter what we did, we could never get her to go back down into the basement. Not once. I could be carrying treats. I could be calling her in my happiest voice. I could be halfway down the stairs, encouraging her. She would plant her feet at the top step and refuse to move. Sometimes she would whine softly. Other times she would just turn away. This was the same dog who normally couldn't stand to be away from me. The same dog who followed me into bathrooms, closets, and anywhere else I went. But the basement was different. It was a hard boundary for her. She wouldn't cross it. Years went by, and her behavior never changed. She never went back down there again. Every time I did laundry, She stayed upstairs, watching the basement door like she was waiting for something to come out. Over time, I stopped trying to force it. Whatever had scared her that day had made a deep impression, and I trusted her instincts more than my own. I've always believed that animals sense things we can't. They hear frequencies we don't notice, smell things we can't detect, and pick up on changes in the environment that slip past us. Maybe she heard something I didn't. Maybe she sensed something that wasn't meant for human perception. I don't know. But I do know that her fear was real. A couple of months after the basement incident, something else happened. It was evening, and my teenage son and I were sitting in the living room watching TV. The dog was with us, stretched out on the floor, relaxed. The house felt calm, safe, just a normal night at home. Then we heard it, heavy footsteps. They sounded like adult footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming up the wooden basement stairs. Not creaks, not settling noises. Actual steps. The kind that come from boots or heavy shoes hitting old wood. Each step was distinct and evenly spaced, moving upward exactly the way a person would climb stairs. I remember holding my breath. My son looked at me at the same time I looked at him. We both heard it. Even with the TV on, the sound cut through clearly. The dog lifted her head instantly, my ears forward, listening. Her body tensed in a way that made my stomach drop. The footsteps continued up the stairs. I remember thinking the basement door was about to open. I waited for the handle to turn. I waited to see someone step into the room. My mind raced through possibilities. Had someone broken in? Was there some logical explanation I hadn't considered? Nothing happened. The footsteps stopped. The basement door stayed closed. The house went quiet again. We sat there for a few seconds, not saying anything, letting the silence stretch out. Finally, I muted the TV. The sudden quiet made everything feel louder somehow. I could hear my own breathing. "Did you hear that?" my son asked. I nodded. The dog didn't relax. She stayed alert, watching the basement door, as if she was waiting for the sound to start again. It never did. After a while, we turned the TV back on, but the mood was gone. That easy, comfortable feeling you have when you're just hanging out at home had vanished. Nothing else happened that night. No door opening, no footsteps continuing, no explanation revealed itself. But the memory of that sound stuck with us. The clarity of it. The way it didn't sound like a house noise at all, but like a person moving with purpose. After that, I started paying closer attention to the house. I noticed how certain areas always felt colder, especially near the basement stairs. I noticed how sound carried strangely sometimes, like it came from the wrong direction. I noticed how the dog would occasionally stare at the basement door for long periods, head tilted, listening to something I couldn't hear. Still, I didn't panic. I didn't start researching the house's history or calling in experts. I didn't feel threatened. It was more like living with an odd presence that kept its distance. Something that repeated itself, like a recording playing back moments from another time. That's why the idea of a residual haunting makes the most sense to me. Not a ghost that interacts or responds, not something aware of us, just leftover energy, an imprint, like the house remembering its past and replaying it once in a while. Footsteps climbing stairs that were climbed 1,000 times before. Movements echoing long after the people who made them were gone. That doesn't make it less creepy. If anything, it makes it more unsettling. The idea that places can hold on to moments, that actions can leave traces behind, that time isn't as clean and linear as we like to think, that maybe under the right conditions, the past can leak into the present. I don't know what my dog saw or sensed that day in the basement. I don't know who or what those footsteps belonged to. I only know that something happened that changed the way she behaved forever, and that both my son and I heard something we couldn't explain. I've lived in other places since then. Newer houses, apartments, quiet spaces with thin walls and modern layouts. I've never experienced anything like that again. My dogs since then have gone into basements without hesitation. No sudden fear, no refusal. But I still think about that old house sometimes, about the basement that my dog wouldn't enter, about the sound of boots on wooden stairs, about how the past might not always stay where we think it belongs. It wasn't dramatic. There were no apparitions, no voices calling names, no objects flying across rooms, just moments that didn't quite fit. Moments that made you pause and wonder if maybe there's more to the world than what we see and hear. And honestly, that's what makes it linger in my mind. Because even now, years later, I can still hear those footsteps. Two summers ago, my family and I decided to take a trip that was supposed to be fun and relaxed, something we had looked forward to for months. We were visiting relatives in Gilroy, California, and the plan was to go to the Gilroy Garlic Festival one day while we were there. It sounded like one of those classic summer experiences: spicy food, live music, crowds of people all enjoying the warm weather, and a chance to spend time with family in a familiar place I hadn't seen in a while. I remember the anticipation on the way there, how we talked about what we would eat, which booths we wanted to look at, and how excited my little brother was to try all the garlic ice cream he had heard about. There was this easy sense of normalcy in the car, windows cracked open, the sun strong on the highway, everyone chatting and laughing. But even then, we were running late without realizing how much later we would end up arriving. Traffic was terrible that afternoon, worse than anyone expected. What should have been a short drive turned into a crawl that felt like it lasted forever. At first, we joked about it like you do when you're stuck behind a wall of cars and the heat from the asphalt makes the horizon shimmer. We tried to make the best of it, rolling down the windows, turning on music, and talking about things to pass the time. But the sun was hot, and everyone started to get restless. My mom kept checking her watch, calculating how late we were going to be. My dad grimaced in the driver's seat, trying to stay patient, but obviously annoyed. We didn't know it at the time, but that traffic was just the first part of one of the most intense experiences any of us have ever gone through. Eventually, we made it close enough that we had to abandon the car a few blocks from the festival. The parking lots were full, and there was simply no moving forward anymore. So we found a spot a couple of blocks away and started walking toward the festival grounds. It was already around 5 in the evening by that point, which meant the sun was lowering in the sky, and the heat of the day was beginning to fade into something warmer and softer, like a glow that filters through the edges of everything. That's the memory I have of that walk, the warmth, the sounds of distant chatter, the smell of street food drifting through the air, and the feeling that we were finally almost there after all the traffic. When we got to the food court area, our first thought was to eat something because we were hungry, tired, and ready to enjoy the festival after the long drive and the slow walk. The food court was lively. There were families everywhere, people with festival bracelets, children with sticky hands eating ice cream cones, and the sounds of people talking, laughing, music playing over loudspeakers. Nothing about it at first seemed out of the ordinary. There were no warnings, no sense of danger, no indication that anything would ever go wrong. We picked out something to eat, sat down at one of the picnic tables, and talked about what we might do next, or what we wanted to see, and how much time we still had before the festival closed. It all felt like summer, like a memory in the making that would be fun to look back on. After we ate, my little brother realized he forgot to put on sunscreen, and everyone agreed we should head back toward the car so he could put it on before we stayed out in the sun any longer. We packed up our things, got up from the picnic bench, and started walking back in the direction of where we had parked earlier. The food court was still busy, still full of noise and the smell of food and families, but there was this sense of movement in the air, like people were threading through each other, some heading deeper into the festival, while others, like us, were starting to make their way back. Then everything changed in a way I still struggle to explain. The first sound was almost impossible to piece together in the moment. It didn't sound like anything familiar. It wasn't fireworks, and it wasn't a car backfiring. It was a crack, then another, and suddenly it was like someone had opened a floodgate of sound directly inside the festival grounds. It was rapid, so rapid that it was hard to count. Hundreds of sharp, explosive pops filled the air in what felt like less than a second. It didn't make sense at first. There was no rhythm to it, no musical cadence, no beat. Just a split second of noise that was unmistakable once it started. And then the screaming began. People around us froze for a flash of time, caught between confusion and panic. And within a heartbeat, it flipped into full chaos. The sound of the shots continued, echoing in every direction, overlapping, and no one had any idea where they were coming from or why they were happening. Screams ripped out from the crowd, adults yelling, children crying, people shouting for loved ones, and the sound was like a jolt. Like something inside you suddenly flipped a switch from normal afternoon to run, right now, run. Nobody stopped to think. Nobody argued or asked what was happening. People didn't wait to decide if they were safe or not. They just ran, and we ran with them. I don't remember exactly how we moved, like how my legs decided where to go or how my body reacted under that kind of fear. I remember the feeling of being swept up in a wave of people, the shoulders and arms brushing past me as everyone pushed toward shelter and away from the shots. We had no idea where safety was. We just knew we needed to get away from the sound, to put distance between ourselves and whatever was happening. In the chaos, all of us were shouting for each other. My mom calling my brother's name, my dad telling us to stay close. But even that got swallowed up by the noise, by the fear, by the instinct that told every person there that they needed to survive this moment. I honestly don't remember how we got out of the festival. There is this blank in my mind where the details should be. Like my brain refuses to store that memory the way it stores normal moments. All I remember is being on the freeway, in the car, heading the opposite direction, away from where the chaos had erupted. My dad was driving, my mom was trying to keep us calm in the back seat, and my brother was shaking, wide-eyed, silent, except for the occasional whimper. None of us fully understood what had just happened, but we all knew it was bad. We could all feel it, like a physical weight pressing against our chests. Then our phones buzzed at the same time. It wasn't a ring or a message from a friend. It was an emergency alert, one of those loud, urgent alarms that practically screams at you when it arrives. The message was simple but horrifying. A suspected mass shooting at the festival. Authorities warning people to avoid the area for safety. That was when reality hit in a really different way. Until then, we'd been acting out of fear and instinct, trying to get away from the noise and find safety. But when the alert came in, it confirmed something every one of us was afraid to even think. That those weren't fireworks or fireworks gone wrong. That was gunfire. That was someone using a weapon against other people. That was an attack. I remember the silence in the car after the alert. It was as if the world outside had stopped moving. Everything felt slow and unreal. We looked at each other with these wide eyes that said the same thing without anyone speaking it. What just happened? We didn't know the details yet, didn't understand why, didn't know who or how many people were involved. But the fear didn't go away. It just turned into this heavy, dark knot of dread in our stomachs that never quite loosened. The drive home was quiet. No one had the words to talk about it, and the things that did come to mind felt too intense to say out loud. Every once in a while, someone on the freeway would look at their phone, check for updates, and then put the phone down with that look of disbelief in their eyes, like they couldn't believe the words they had just read. It was the kind of fear that doesn't leave you right away, the kind that sits in your chest long after the danger has passed. When we finally made it back to our relative's house, we turned on the news and found out more about what happened. That's when the full weight of it hit us, that there were real people there who got hurt, families torn apart in a place that was supposed to be safe and fun, that so many lives had been changed in an instant, that a moment of normal summer joy turned violent without warning. We watched interviews with witnesses, heard the sirens in the background of news clips, saw the emergency vehicles driving into the festival grounds, and every time the images appeared on the screen, it felt like a punch in the gut. What's haunting about it is how fast it all happened. One minute we were excited and looking forward to food and music and laughter, and the next minute our entire world had shifted. The timeline in my head goes from traffic and food straight to chaos and fear, and then to trying to understand what just happened. It's like there is no middle ground, no gradual transition, no warning, no pause, just this sudden, surreal leap from calm to terror. Even now, weeks and months later, when I think about that day, there's still this strange mixture of emotions that rises up in me. There's still a knot of fear in my chest when I remember the sound of those shots. There's a sense of disbelief that something so real and so violent could happen in a moment that began so ordinary. And there's this strange astonishment at how quickly life can change direction in the blink of an eye. My little brother still talks about that day sometimes, and every time he does, his voice is quieter than before, like the memory is hard for him to revisit. My parents try not to bring it up unless I ask, but the way they look at each other when the topic comes up makes it clear they think about it too, that they replay the moment in their minds and still feel the shock of it. I don't know if any of us will ever fully shake what we heard that day, the way our adrenaline spiked, the way our hearts raced, the way we didn't know where the danger was coming from or when it would stop, because that's what makes it so haunting. Not just the sound of the shots, not just the fear of running, but the fact that none of us knew what was happening until it was already unfolding. We were there in the middle of a crowd of people, surrounded by laughter and summer music and the smell of garlic fries, and then in a split second we were running for our lives. I'm trying to find safety from something we couldn't see clearly in the moment. You never think a day like that will happen to you. You never expect something so ordinary to become so terrifying so fast. And yet that's exactly what it was. A day that started like any other summer afternoon and ended as a memory I'll never forget. My manager told me this story on my second night on the job, like it was nothing more than small talk. And I remember standing there pretending to listen while my brain was slowly trying to catch up with what he was actually saying. It was about his god brother, a guy he had grown up around, someone he knew before everything went wrong. The way he told it made it feel even heavier, because there was no dramatic buildup, no warning, just a calm voice explaining something that felt too dark to be real. His god brother had joined the military when he was still young, barely more than a kid himself. He went through basic training, and before he had any real time to adjust or understand what he was getting into, he was shipped straight to Iraq. There was no long break, no easing into it, no chance to process the change from training exercises to real life. One moment he was learning drills and rules, and the next he was in a war zone. At that time, the rules of engagement were brutally simple. According to my manager, they were taught that if they saw certain things, they were to eliminate them immediately. No questions, no hesitation, just react. There was no room for judgment or second-guessing. You were trained to see movement, see a shape, see a threat, and respond instantly. The problem was that the reality on the ground didn't match the clean, controlled scenarios they practiced. A lot of the time, the people getting caught in that violence weren't enemy soldiers at all. My manager said his god brother ended up killing children, over and over again. Kids who were in the wrong place, or holding something that looked suspicious, or simply running when they were told not to. There was no time to stop and think about who they were or what their lives were like. You followed orders or you didn't come back alive. That kind of thing changes a person fast, especially when they're young and still figuring out who they are. It breaks something inside you. And once it's broken, it doesn't just snap back into place. When his tour was over and the military started processing him to send him home, he was already a completely different person. Whatever he had been before Iraq was gone. The structure, the adrenaline, the constant threat were suddenly stripped away. And he was left alone with everything he had done and everything he had seen. Instead of getting help, instead of being guided back into normal life, he fell straight into drugs. He started dealing meth, using it, surrounding himself with people who were just as broken as he was. There was no pause between war and chaos. It was just one kind of destruction replaced by another. When he finally made it back home to Texas, things only got worse. My manager said he went off the deep end completely. He wasn't stable anymore. He was angry, paranoid, and disconnected from reality. The discipline and rules that had kept him functioning in the military were gone, and there was nothing to replace them. He couldn't switch back into being a son, a friend, or a normal member of society. He didn't fit anywhere. One night, something inside him finally snapped. There was no clear buildup, no long argument that anyone knew about. He drove to his parents' house, people who had raised him, who probably had no idea how far gone he really was. He killed them. Not in a moment of blind panic, but deliberately. Afterward, he dismembered their bodies. The level of detachment that takes is hard to even imagine. Then he loaded their remains into his car, drove back to his own house, and started burning them. The smell spread through the town. Burning flesh isn't something you can hide easily, and people noticed. Neighbors started calling it in, reporting the strange and horrible smell drifting through the air. While all of that was happening, he was still moving around, still making decisions, like this was just another operation he needed to complete. At some point, he told his girlfriend what he had done. My manager didn't go into detail about how that conversation started, only that once she understood what he was saying, she threatened to call the police. That was when he turned on her, too. He tied her to the bed so she couldn't move. Then he taped a .357 Magnum in place, aimed directly at her head. He rigged it with strings, one attached to the trigger and another attached to the doorway, creating a crude trap. If anyone opened the door the wrong way, the gun would fire. After setting that up, he called the police himself. By that point, they were already on their way because of the reports coming in from the town. On the phone, he calmly told them exactly what he had done. He told them where to find him. He explained the situation in detail. Over and over again, he warned them not to come through the front door. He told them that if they did, the girl would die. He wasn't screaming or panicking. He was controlled, almost methodical, and like he was explaining instructions. The police arrived anyway. Despite the warnings, they went through the front door. The trap was triggered, and his girlfriend was killed instantly. My manager paused for a moment when he said that part. Like even after all this time, it still hit him hard. It wasn't just another victim. It was someone who might have survived if things had been handled differently. After that, there was no escaping what he had done. He was arrested, charged, and eventually found guilty. The court sentenced him to death. According to my manager, even then he didn't act the way people expect someone on death row to act. He didn't beg or cry or claim innocence. Instead, he asked to be moved to the front of the line for execution. He didn't want to sit on death row for years waiting. He wanted it over with. Before the execution, my manager spoke to him one last time. I don't know how that conversation even happened or why my manager was allowed to have it, but he said he would never forget what his god brother told him. When asked if he felt remorse, the man said he didn't really feel it the way people think he should. He wasn't overwhelmed with guilt or sorrow in the traditional sense. What he did say was that he wished someone had gotten to him sooner, before he killed his parents, before everything crossed that final line. Not because he wanted to undo it for himself, but because he knew, on some level, that he had been broken long before that night. Hearing all of this on my second night at work felt unreal. I remember nodding along, trying not to show how shaken I was. Inside, I was horrified. This wasn't a story from a movie or a true crime podcast. It was something that had happened to real people, connected to the guy standing right in front of me, telling it so casually. I went home that night with the story stuck in my head, replaying every detail, wondering how many people come back from war carrying things they never get help for, and how close some of them might be to the edge without anyone realizing it. That was the night I realized how thin the line can be between a normal life and absolute horror, and how sometimes the damage is done long before anyone notices. I used to have a stepfather who was emotionally and mentally abusive. And even though I was young at the time, I still remember the way it felt living under the same roof as someone who could control the entire mood of the house. And it's hard to explain to people who haven't experienced it, because when someone is abusive in that way, it isn't always obvious from the outside. It doesn't always look like screaming or bruises or dramatic scenes. Sometimes it looks like constant tension, like walking on eggshells, like your stomach dropping every time you hear their footsteps in the hallway, like learning to read their tone of voice the way other kids learn to read books. You start recognizing patterns. You start predicting their moods. You start adjusting your behavior just to avoid setting them off. And when you're a child, you don't realize how wrong it is. You just assume that's what life is supposed to feel like. By the time I was in 6th grade, I had already learned how to stay quiet, how to avoid attention, how to keep my emotions to myself, and how to make myself small so I wouldn't become a target. I remember the feeling of always being on edge, like I was constantly waiting for something bad to happen. I didn't feel safe in my own home, and the worst part was that I didn't even know how to explain it. I couldn't put it into words. I just knew that my stepfather made me feel afraid, and that fear became normal for me. It became something I carried every day, even when nothing was happening. I could be sitting in my room doing homework, and I'd still feel that nervousness in my chest because I never knew when the next comment would come, when the next insult would be thrown, or when he would decide he wanted to control the room again. Eventually, my mom reached her breaking point. I don't know what exactly made her finally decide to leave, because when you're a kid, you don't see the full picture. You just see the surface. But I do know that in 6th grade, she finally made the choice to end it. She left him. And even though I didn't understand everything, I remember feeling like I could breathe again. It wasn't instant relief because the damage was already done, but it felt like the air in the house changed. It felt like we weren't trapped anymore. Luckily, my sister and I didn't have to visit him after that. He never signed any adoption papers for us, which meant he wasn't legally our father, and he didn't have the same rights that some step-parents might have. But honestly, even if we had been forced to visit him, we didn't want to. The thought of being alone with him again made my stomach twist. My sister and I both felt the same way. We were done. We wanted him out of our lives completely. We wanted to forget him, forget the way he made us feel, and pretend he was just a bad dream that was finally over. The summer between 6th and 7th grade started off like it was going to be normal. It felt like a fresh start. I remember thinking that maybe life would finally feel like it did for other kids. Maybe I could enjoy summer without constantly feeling stressed. Maybe I could go outside, laugh, and not have that heavy feeling in my chest all the time. For a little while, it actually felt that way. We were adjusting to a new routine, and it wasn't perfect, but it was calmer. Then things started getting worse again. My mom found out that my ex-stepfather had a girlfriend, and the girlfriend was involved with drugs. When my mom learned that, she refused to even give us the option to visit him. And honestly, she was right. Not only was he abusive, but now there was someone else in his life who could bring even more danger into the situation. My mom wasn't going to risk her children being around that kind of environment, especially after everything we had already been through. It was one of the first times I remember realizing how protective she really was. She wasn't just leaving him. She was trying to shield us from him completely, but he didn't accept that. Abusive people don't like losing control. They don't like being cut off. They don't like the feeling that the people they used to dominate have moved on without them. And even though he was no longer living with us, he still tried to insert himself into our lives. One night, my sister and I were at home, just hanging out like normal. It was one of those quiet evenings where you're doing your own thing, trying to enjoy the peace. I don't remember what we were doing exactly. Maybe watching TV, maybe scrolling on our phones, maybe just talking. But I do remember the moment the phone rang. My ex-stepfather was calling my sister. The second we saw his name, the mood changed instantly. It was like someone turned the lights off inside the room. My stomach dropped. My sister looked nervous, but she answered, probably thinking it would be quick or that he would just say something simple. At that time, we still didn't fully understand how far he was willing to go. His voice on the phone wasn't calm. It wasn't friendly. It was demanding. He told her he needed to see us. He said he was coming over in 10 minutes. And he made it very clear that he didn't care what our mom said. He didn't care if she told him not to come. He said he would force his way in if he had to. He even said that if that was the only way to see us, he would take us. The moment those words came out, my entire body went cold. It didn't sound like an empty threat. It didn't sound like someone joking. It sounded like someone who believed he had the right to do whatever he wanted. Someone who believed that our feelings didn't matter. Someone who believed he could still control us, even from a distance. I remember my sister's face changing as she listened. She looked like she was trying not to cry. She was scared, and I was scared too. We were just kids. We had no power in that situation. All we could do was sit there and imagine him showing up at our door. My sister handed the phone to my mom, and I'll never forget the look on my mom's face. She was furious. It wasn't the kind of anger where someone yells and loses control. It was the kind of anger that comes from fear, from being pushed too far, from realizing someone is threatening your children. She grabbed the phone and started yelling at him, telling him he wasn't allowed to come, telling him he had no right to threaten us, telling him that if he showed up, she would call the police. For a moment, it felt like time slowed down. I remember standing there, listening to my mom's voice, hearing her shout his name, hearing her tell him to stay away, and all I could think about was the front door. I kept imagining it opening. I kept imagining him stepping inside. I kept imagining being grabbed, being dragged away, being taken somewhere I couldn't escape. But he didn't come that night, and I should have felt relief. But I didn't, because the threat was already planted in my mind. Even though he didn't show up, I realized something important. He was willing to scare us. He was willing to use fear as a weapon. He wanted us to feel powerless, even when he wasn't physically there, and that meant he could do it again at any time. After that, the summer didn't feel like summer anymore. It felt like a countdown. Every day I woke up, I wondered if he would show up. Every time the phone rang, my heart would jump. Every time a car slowed down near our house, I would peek out the window, terrified it was him. I started paying attention to every sound outside. A knock at the door, a footstep on the porch, even the wind rattling something would make me tense up. And it didn't stop. Throughout the summer, he kept trying to contact us. He kept showing up at our house when we weren't home. Sometimes he would leave messages. Sometimes he would try to get information through other people. Sometimes he would just appear, like he wanted to remind us that he still knew where we lived. It felt like he was haunting our lives, not like a ghost, like a predator. My mom finally had enough. She wrote him a letter telling him to stop contacting us. I don't remember the exact words, but she explained to me later that it was basically a cease and desist type of letter. Something formal, something serious. A warning that if he didn't stop, she would take him to court for harassment. She wanted a paper trail. She wanted proof. She wanted something that could protect us if he kept pushing. For a short time, it seemed like it worked, but it didn't last. He backed off for a little while, and then he started again. It was like he couldn't stand being ignored. He couldn't stand being shut out. And the more my mom tried to enforce boundaries, the more he seemed to push back. At one point, he got an apartment near our house. When my mom told me that, I felt like I couldn't breathe. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was paranoia. The idea that he was close enough to drive by, close enough to watch us, close enough to show up whenever he wanted, made me feel like I was trapped again. I started imagining him in the grocery store. I started imagining him at the gas station. I started imagining him behind us in line somewhere. I started thinking about school, about walking home, about being alone for even a few minutes. I was 12 years old, and I was living in a constant state of stress. I didn't sleep well. Every night I would lie in bed and listen to the sounds of the house. I would listen for footsteps outside. I would listen for the doorknob turning. I would listen for a window opening. Sometimes I would hear normal noises like pipes or the air conditioner. and my mind would twist them into something threatening. I was afraid of being kidnapped, and that fear didn't feel dramatic to me. It felt real. It felt logical, because he had said it. He had threatened it. He had made it clear that he didn't care about rules or boundaries. Why, he had made it clear that he thought he could force his way into our lives. That kind of fear changes you. It doesn't just go away when the sun comes up. It follows you. It sticks to your skin. It changes the way you walk through the world. I was afraid to go out in public. I was afraid to be separated from my mom. I was afraid to be alone in any room. I was afraid of strangers. I was afraid of men who looked even slightly like him. I was afraid of any car that slowed down near us. And on top of all that fear, I was also dealing with depression and anxiety. Real depression. The kind that makes everything feel heavy. The kind that makes you feel like you're drowning even when nothing is happening. It was like my mind was exhausted from being scared all the time. Like my body couldn't handle the constant adrenaline and tension. There were days where I felt numb. There were days where I felt like I couldn't even explain why I was sad, because it wasn't one single thing. It was the entire atmosphere of my life. It was the feeling of being hunted by someone who used to have power over me. Looking back now, I realize how wrong it was for a child to feel that way. Children should be worried about homework, friends, and summer plans. Not whether someone is going to show up at their house and take them. Not whether they're safe in their own neighborhood. Not whether they can trust the world around them. That summer felt endless. But time kept moving forward anyway. School started, months passed, and slowly the contact stopped. He stopped calling. He stopped showing up. He stopped trying to force himself into our lives. It didn't happen overnight. It was gradual. Like the threat slowly faded into the background. At first, I didn't trust it. I kept waiting for him to return. I kept waiting for the next phone call, the next surprise visit, the next threat. But eventually, the silence became real. Years passed, and I never heard from him again. He finally left our family alone. The strange thing is, he still lives in the same city as me. I know he's still out there. I know he exists somewhere in the same place I do. But the fear I used to feel is gone. I don't feel that panic anymore. I don't feel that constant paranoia. I don't feel like a helpless child trapped under someone else's shadow. Now, when I think about him, the emotion I feel isn't fear. It's anger. It's resentment. It's the kind of anger that comes from realizing what was stolen from you. The peace he stole. The safety he stole. The childhood he damaged. The nights he ruined. The way he made me feel like the world was dangerous when I was too young to even understand what danger truly was. But I also feel something else. I feel stronger. Because he can't hurt me anymore. Not the way he used to. I'm older now. I understand what he was doing. I understand that his words were designed to control and intimidate. I understand that he wanted to make us feel powerless. And the biggest thing I've learned is that abusive people thrive on fear. They thrive on reactions. They thrive on the feeling that they can still affect you. But boundaries matter. Distance matters. Support matters. And healing matters. If you're struggling with someone emotionally or mentally abusive, please know this. You are not weak. You are not dramatic. You are not overreacting. The fear you feel is real, and it's your body's way of warning you that something is wrong. And you don't have to handle it alone. Talk to someone you trust. Keep evidence. Set boundaries. Get help if you can. If you ever feel physically threatened, take it seriously. Because people like that don't always stop when you ask them to. Sometimes they only stop when they realize they can't reach you anymore. And one day, if you're lucky, you'll wake up and realize the fear is gone. You'll realize the person who once controlled your life is just a memory now. And you'll understand that surviving them didn't make you weak. It made you strong. Sorry to interrupt for just a moment. If you're new here, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers for daily true horror stories that stay with you long after they're told, quietly unsettling and meant for the late hours. You can also turn on notifications so you're always here when a new story arrives and the night begins to stir again. Now, let's continue. My dad told me these stories years ago, but I can still hear the way his voice changed when he talked about them. He didn't say much. He didn't try to dramatize anything. He didn't need to. The details were already horrifying enough. And the worst part is that both of these things happened in broad daylight during normal moments. The kind of moments where nobody expects death to suddenly appear. He grew up in a third world country, in a place where life was busy, crowded, and often unsafe in ways that people in richer countries don't even think about. Roads were massive and chaotic. Trucks were everywhere. Sidewalks existed, but they didn't really protect you the way sidewalks are supposed to. People walked close to speeding vehicles every day, not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. The first story happened when my dad was older, maybe in his 20s or 30s. He was walking home like he had done hundreds of times before. It was a normal day. The weather wasn't special. The road wasn't special. There was nothing about that moment that should have stood out. He was walking on a paved sidewalk beside a mega road, the kind of road that feels like a highway even inside the city. It was wide, loud, and filled with heavy traffic. The vehicles didn't just pass by, they roared past. The air would shake. The ground would vibrate. Even standing near it, you could feel the force of it. On the other side of the road, he noticed a woman walking in the opposite direction. She was holding a baby in her arms. That image is simple, almost peaceful in a way. A mother carrying her child, probably heading home or going to a market. It's something you see every day. Nothing about it looks dangerous. Nothing about it looks like a tragedy waiting to happen. But that road was dangerous. And sometimes danger doesn't announce itself until it's already too late. A massive truck came down the road, speeding past like it owned the street. The kind of truck that carries cargo, heavy enough to shake the air around it. My dad told me the truck didn't slow down. It didn't honk. It didn't even seem to notice the people nearby. It just blasted through like a machine. And then something happened that my dad said he couldn't even fully understand in the moment. As the truck passed, it created this strange force, like a sudden wave in the air, almost like the road itself inhaled. My dad described it like a vacuum, a pull, a violent suction that came out of nowhere. The baby was in the woman's arms 1 second. And then suddenly the baby was being pulled. Pulled toward the road, pulled toward the truck. The woman didn't have time to react. Nobody did. It happened so fast that it didn't even feel real. One moment the baby was safe. The next moment the baby was gone, ripped from her arms by a force she couldn't fight. It wasn't like the baby slipped. It wasn't like she dropped the baby. It was as if the air itself reached out and stole the child from her. The baby flew toward the road, and instantly the baby was hit, killed immediately. There was no scream, no chance, no miracle, no second to save them. It was just over. Like life could be erased in a blink, without warning, without mercy. My dad said the woman froze at first, like her brain couldn't accept what she was seeing. It was like her body stopped functioning, like she was trapped in shock. She stood there staring, still holding her arms out, as if her baby might somehow still be there. Then the reality hit her, and she broke. She started screaming, crying, falling apart in a way my dad said he had never seen before. It wasn't normal crying. It wasn't sadness. It was pure devastation. The kind of pain that comes from something so sudden and unfair that your mind can't even process it. My dad said the sound of her grief stayed with him. He didn't know what to do. He was just a man on a sidewalk. He couldn't undo what had happened. He couldn't fix it. He couldn't rewind time. He could only stand there and watch the aftermath of something that should never happen to anyone. That day changed him. Even years later, he couldn't talk about it without looking away, without going quiet. He didn't say, "I have trauma," because men from his generation didn't speak like that. But I could tell he was scarred, because how could you witness something like that and not be? How could you watch a mother lose her baby in the most violent, sudden way possible and still feel safe in the world? That was the first story. The second story happened when my dad was much younger. He was still a child. And what makes it even more disturbing is that it happened during one of the most innocent things kids can do, playing soccer. He told me he and his friends were playing in an open area, probably a dusty field or a simple playground. No fancy equipment, no padded goalposts. Just kids running around, laughing, yelling, enjoying life. One of his friends was the goalie. The goalie position always feels heroic when you're a kid. You get to dive, you get to block shots. You get to be the one who saves the team. That boy was probably proud to be standing there, ready to stop the ball like a professional. Then someone took a shot. The ball came flying toward the goal, fast enough that the goalie had to jump, and he did. He threw himself sideways to block it. But as he jumped, his head slammed into the goal post. Not lightly. Not like a bump you laugh off. Full force. The kind of impact that makes a sound you never forget. My dad said the boy dropped instantly. Like a switch turned off. No crying, no holding his head, no trying to stand back up. He just collapsed. At first, the other kids probably thought he was pretending. Or maybe they thought he got knocked out and would wake up. Kids don't immediately understand death. They assume people get back up, but he didn't. My dad said his friend died right there. Instantly. A child playing soccer, and in 1 second he was gone. My dad didn't know the medical reason, but later he assumed it was something like a brain bleed, something catastrophic inside the skull, the kind of injury where there's no time, no warning signs, no way to save them without immediate medical care. And in that country, in that environment, there probably was no immediate medical care. There was no ambulance arriving in minutes. There was no emergency surgery. There was just a group of children standing around in shock, watching their friend lie still on the ground, not understanding why he wasn't moving. My dad said that moment was one of the first times he truly understood what death was. Not as an idea, but as reality. Because when you're a kid, you don't believe death can touch you. You think it belongs to old people, to strangers, to stories. You don't expect it to show up during a soccer game. But it did. And after that, nothing felt completely safe again. When my dad told me these stories, he didn't cry. He didn't even show much emotion. But there was something in his eyes that made me realize he was still there in those moments, even decades later. Still seeing the baby being pulled away, still seeing his friend collapse by the goalpost, still hearing the screams, still feeling that helplessness. And I think that's what makes these stories so haunting. They weren't murders. They weren't crimes. They weren't ghost stories. They were just normal life. And then suddenly they weren't. It's terrifying to realize how thin the line is between an ordinary day and a nightmare. How quickly the world can change, not because of evil, but because of speed, force, and bad luck. And the worst part is that my dad wasn't the one who died. He was the one who lived. He was the one who had to carry those images for the rest of his life. Some people survive disasters and walk away physically fine, but mentally, they never leave the scene. They never stop replaying it. They never stop thinking about how unfair it was, how fast it happened, and how nothing could be done. My dad never said he was traumatized, but I could tell. Because even now, when he talks about those two moments, his voice changes. He gets quiet. He looks away like he's watching it again. And I know he is. Because some things don't fade. They stay with you forever. The Moby Prince disaster is one of those real-life tragedies that feels too cruel to be true. Not because it was complicated or because it happened in some far-off stormy ocean, but because it happened so close to safety. It happened in a place where help should have arrived quickly. And the worst part is that so many people didn't die instantly. They died waiting, believing rescue was coming right up until the very end. The ferry was called the Moby Prince, an Italian passenger ship making what should have been a routine trip. It was supposed to be simple. Leave the harbor, head out to sea, and continue its voyage. The passengers on board were ordinary people, workers heading home, families, travelers. The crew had done this kind of departure countless times. Nothing about the night suggested it would become one of the most horrifying maritime disasters in modern European history. As the ferry left the harbor, it collided with a massive oil tanker. The tanker was carrying fuel, and the impact caused a leak. The kind of leak that turns a normal accident into a death sentence. The oil spilled out into the water, and almost immediately, the entire area erupted into flames. The fire wasn't slow. It wasn't something that started small and grew. It was instant. It was violent. It was like the ship entered a wall of fire the moment it made contact. People often imagine a fire as something you can run from, something that gives you time to react. But this wasn't that kind of fire. This was fuel, oil, and open air. It ignited like an explosion. The flames spread across the ferry's deck and surrounding water so fast that the crew didn't even have time to properly stop the ship. The ferry's controls were abandoned almost immediately, not because the crew didn't care, but because they couldn't stay there. The heat and smoke were overwhelming. It became impossible to remain at the bridge. The people responsible for steering and controlling the vessel were forced out by the fire itself. And in those first moments, confusion took over. The crew believed they sent an SOS. They believed they had called for help. They believed they had done what any ship would do in an emergency. And they also believed, with complete confidence, that rescue would come quickly. After all, they weren't far out at sea. They were only minutes into the voyage. They were still near the harbor, still close to shore, still close to lights and people and safety. In their minds, it wasn't a question of if someone would come. It was only a question of how long it would take. So the crew and passengers did what seemed like the smartest thing. They gathered together in what was believed to be a fireproof room, a protected compartment designed to keep people safe until rescue arrived. It was meant to be a refuge, a place where they could wait out the danger. The idea was simple. Stay together, stay inside, conserve oxygen, avoid the flames, and wait for help. And for a while, that plan probably felt like the right decision. Outside, the ferry was burning. The air was thick with smoke. The deck was a nightmare. But inside that room, people could still breathe. They could still speak. They could still hold on to hope. They waited. Minutes passed. Then more. At first, they likely heard the chaos around them and assumed rescuers were already on the way. Maybe they thought they would hear boats pulling up alongside. Maybe they expected voices, flashlights, footsteps, but nothing came. The reason rescue didn't come wasn't because people didn't care. It wasn't because the harbor had no emergency response. It was because no one fully understood what had happened. The oil tanker reported being hit, but it was believed that a tugboat had collided with it, not the ferry. And the SOS message that was sent out from the Moby Prince was apparently garbled, unclear, impossible to understand properly. The message didn't clearly identify who they were or what exactly had happened. In a disaster like that, a few broken words can mean the difference between life and death. So the ferry burned, and the people on board waited, assuming that help was already coming. At some point, some of them realized waiting might not be enough. The heat grew worse. The smoke became thicker. Panic started creeping in. People began to consider escaping. But the ferry wasn't like a building where you can just run outside and find open air. Outside was fire. The deck was still burning, and it wasn't just flames you could dodge. The surface itself became dangerously hot. The metal heated up like a stove. Anyone who stepped out onto it would feel it immediately. The air outside was poison, filled with smoke and toxic fumes. Some people tried anyway. They must have been desperate. They must have thought they had a chance. But when they reached the deck, they found that the heat was unbearable. The flames were still there. The metal was scorching. People couldn't run across it. They couldn't stand on it. Their bodies were exposed to extreme temperatures. They essentially cooked to death on the deck. That detail is hard to even imagine. The idea that someone could survive the collision, survive the first explosion, survive the initial chaos, only to die in the open air because the ship itself had turned into a burning furnace. Those who stayed in the fireproof room had their own fate waiting for them. Even if the room resisted flames, it couldn't create oxygen. As the fire raged, smoke and gases spread. Oxygen levels dropped. The air became thinner, heavier, more toxic. People likely began to feel dizzy. Some would have been coughing. Some would have been crying. Some would have been praying. Some would have been holding their loved ones. And still they waited. Hours passed. They were alive long enough to understand that rescue should have come by now. They were alive long enough to realize something was wrong. They were alive long enough to hope, to fear, and to slowly lose that hope again. Eventually, every person inside that room suffocated. They didn't burn to death. They didn't drown. They didn't explode. They asphyxiated. They died in the place that was meant to protect them. By the time rescuers finally realized the ferry was involved, it was too late. The tragedy wasn't just that the ferry burned. It wasn't just that people died. It was that rescue could have happened. It should have happened. The ferry was close enough that lives could have been saved if the correct information had been known earlier. But the misunderstanding, the confusion, and the delay sealed their fate. In the end, 140 of the 141 passengers and crew died. Only one survived. And the reason he survived is chilling in its simplicity. He jumped overboard almost immediately when he saw the flames. While others ran toward the safe room, believing rescue was guaranteed, he made a decision that probably felt insane in the moment. Jump into the dark water, risk drowning, risk hypothermia, risk being pulled under by currents. But that decision saved him. It's a painful thing to realize. The one person who lived did so because he didn't trust the idea of safety. He trusted his instincts instead. When rescuers finally boarded the ferry, what they found was haunting. Most of the bodies were inside the supposed safe room. They were huddled together, not spread out, not scattered. Together, as if they had clung to each other until the end. The image alone tells you everything. These weren't people who gave up immediately. These were people who stayed calm as long as they could. People who waited. People who believed help was coming. And then there was another detail that makes this tragedy even worse. Authorities later found video footage that some passengers had recorded during the ordeal. Video of them waiting. Video showing that they were alive for hours. Video proof that they could have been saved if someone had known they were there, if someone had known where to look, if someone had understood what had actually happened. That footage is horrifying because it captures something that doesn't usually exist in disasters. The slow passage of time. Not an instant death, not a quick explosion, but hours of people trapped, scared, breathing in smoke, hoping to hear the sound of rescue boats, hoping to hear someone calling out, and hearing nothing. The Moby Prince disaster is remembered not only because of how many people died, but because of how close they were to survival, because of how avoidable it feels, because the tragedy wasn't only fire, it was confusion, it was miscommunication, it was delay, it was the nightmare of being in a burning ship, only minutes from harbor, and still being completely invisible to the world. It's the kind of story that sticks with you, because it forces you to imagine something terrifying, being trapped in a place designed to keep you safe, surrounded by people you don't even know, all waiting for rescue that never comes, while time slowly runs out. And the most haunting part is knowing that for many of them, rescue wasn't impossible, it was just late. My mom told me about this woman she works with, and honestly, even hearing it secondhand made me feel sick. Not just because of what happened, but because of how the woman reacted to it all. It's one thing to survive dangerous people. It's another thing to keep inviting them back into your life, even after they've shown you exactly what they're capable of. This co-worker of my mom's had been in a troubled marriage for a long time. The kind of marriage where things aren't just tense, but broken. Constant fighting, resentment, trust issues, and that feeling that you're living with a stranger instead of a partner. Eventually, things got bad enough that she and her husband separated temporarily. During that separation, she started seeing someone else. It wasn't something casual like a few dates. It sounded like she genuinely leaned on this guy emotionally. Like she was trying to fill the emptiness her marriage had left. The man she was seeing gave her attention, comfort, and that sense of excitement that people sometimes chase when their real life feels miserable. But the relationship wasn't clean. The guy she was seeing was also married. And from what my mom said, he wasn't happily married either. He was the type of man who complained about his wife, complained about his life, complained about how nobody understands him. The type of person who paints himself as the victim, even while doing terrible things. Eventually, my mom's co-worker and her husband tried to work things out. They weren't officially divorced. They were still tied together, still trying to figure out if their marriage could be repaired. And for a moment, it seemed like maybe they were going to stay together. Maybe they would rebuild. Maybe things could settle down. But the man she had been seeing didn't let go. Even after she started trying to fix her marriage, he stayed in contact with her. Messages, calls, staying in the background. Almost like he couldn't accept that she was pulling away. almost like he felt entitled to her attention, even though he was married himself. And then something happened that turned this whole situation from messy and dramatic into pure horror. The married man started getting suspicious of his own wife. He became jealous, paranoid, and convinced she was cheating on him. Whether she actually was or not didn't even matter, because jealousy like that doesn't need proof. It doesn't need logic. It feeds itself. It grows in someone's head until they start seeing betrayal in every small thing. According to what my mom's co-worker said, he snapped. He murdered his wife, and not only did he kill her, he dismembered her. The detail that makes it even more disturbing is that their 12-year-old child was in the house at the time, somewhere nearby, possibly hearing things, possibly seeing things. Even if the child didn't witness the act directly, the fact that it happened under the same roof is horrifying enough. A child in the home, while their mother is being murdered. That is the kind of trauma that doesn't just fade away. That's the kind of thing that ruins a person for life. Eventually, the man was caught and sent to prison. You'd think that would be the end of the story. You'd think my mom's co-worker would look at what happened and realize she had been involved with someone truly dangerous. Someone capable of extreme violence. Someone who didn't just lose control, but committed an act so brutal it's hard to even imagine. But here's where the story becomes even stranger. She stayed in contact with him. Even after he went to jail, she still talked to him. She still kept some kind of connection with him. And when people reacted with shock, she would make excuses. She would brush it off like it was something that could be explained away. She would say things like, "Everyone makes mistakes," as if murder is a mistake, as if dismembering someone is a bad decision you regret later, like cheating on a test or getting into a bar fight. My mom said she couldn't even understand it. She couldn't wrap her mind around how someone could hear what he did and still treat him like he was just a flawed person who deserved sympathy. But that wasn't even the end of it. Because as time went on, her own marriage got worse too. The co-worker's husband, the one she was originally separated from, apparently became dangerously jealous as well. Maybe he suspected she was still talking to the other guy. Maybe he couldn't handle the idea that she had been with someone else. Maybe he felt humiliated. Whatever the reason, he started acting unstable. Then one day, something happened that could have ended her life. Her husband told her they were going somewhere. It sounded normal. Like they were going for a drive or running errands or going to talk somewhere private. She got in the car. I'm probably thinking it was just another uncomfortable conversation or another tense moment between them. But instead of going wherever he claimed they were going, he drove her into the middle of nowhere. Not to a store, not to a friend's house, not to a public place. The middle of nowhere. And at that point, she realized she wasn't just dealing with an angry husband. She was dealing with someone who might actually kill her. My mom said it was like a kidnapping, even if it wasn't official, because she didn't agree to go out there. She didn't know where they were going. And once you're far away from people, far away from help, locked in a moving vehicle with someone who's unstable, you're basically trapped. Something happened out there. She said he attempted to harm her. And from the way it was described, it sounded like he wasn't just trying to scare her. He was trying to hurt her badly, possibly even kill her. Somehow she managed to escape. Maybe she waited for the right moment. Maybe she fought back. Maybe she jumped out of the car. But she got out and she ran. She ran straight into the woods, not even caring where she was going, because being lost in the woods felt safer than staying with him. Imagine the fear in that moment. Running through trees, not knowing if he's chasing you. Not knowing if you're going to trip, fall, get caught. not knowing if you'll even find a road or another person before it's too late. She kept running until she found a stranger's house, a random house in the middle of nowhere. And that stranger helped her. Maybe they called the police. Maybe they let her inside. Maybe they saved her life without even realizing it. She survived. She was okay. But after all of that, after nearly being killed by her own husband, after being involved with a man who murdered and dismembered his wife, after escaping into the woods like something out of a horror movie, she still stayed in contact with both men. She still talked to her husband. She still talked to the man in jail. My mom told me this part with disbelief, because it's the kind of thing that makes you want to shake someone and ask them what they're thinking. How can you survive two different men who are capable of extreme violence and still keep them in your life? How can you look at a man in prison for murdering his wife and say, everyone makes mistakes? How can you have someone drive you into the middle of nowhere with the clear intention to harm you and still answer his calls later? My mom said she just can't deal with her coworker anymore. She listens to her talk and feels like her brain is melting. Because it's not even just sad. It's frustrating. It's confusing. It's like watching someone repeatedly walk toward the edge of a cliff and insisting it's fine. And honestly, the scariest part of the story isn't the violence. It's the mindset. It's the fact that some people get so used to chaos, so used to danger, that it becomes normal to them. It becomes familiar. They start excusing the worst behavior because admitting the truth would mean admitting how close they came to death. Maybe she keeps contact because she doesn't want to believe she ever loved monsters. Maybe she thinks if she forgives them, she can convince herself it wasn't that bad. Maybe she's addicted to drama. Maybe she's terrified of being alone. Maybe she's been broken down so much that she doesn't even understand what a healthy relationship looks like anymore. Whatever the reason, it's disturbing. Because the truth is, she got lucky. She survived. And she might not get lucky again. This happened when I was working at the Rhode Island Attorney General's office. And it's one of those parts of my life that still feels unreal when I think about it. Most people imagine an Attorney General's office as lawyers, paperwork, court filings, and meetings behind closed doors. And sure, there was plenty of that. But what most people don't realize is that behind all the official titles and serious-looking buildings, there is a darker side to the job. A side that never makes it into casual conversation. Because if you told the average person what you saw in a normal workday, they'd think you were exaggerating or trying to be edgy. I wasn't a detective. I wasn't an officer on the street. I wasn't out there chasing criminals. I was the IT director. My job was computers, systems, servers, storage, and security. On paper, no, it sounded like a normal government tech job. The kind of job where the biggest problems would be password resets, network outages, or someone spilling coffee on a keyboard. But because of the way evidence is handled, the IT department ended up being around things most people will never see, not even once in their lives. Crime scene photos, autopsy images, evidence videos, files that weren't meant for the public, things that were only meant for investigators and prosecutors, things that were stored, processed, organized, and protected as part of cases that would eventually go to court. Even though I wasn't the one investigating, I still saw enough to understand something that stuck with me permanently. People think crime is like TV. They think it's quick, clean, and dramatic. A body is discovered. The detectives talk for 10 minutes, and then there's an arrest. But real life isn't like that. Real life is messy, brutal, and sometimes so disturbing that your brain refuses to accept that what you're looking at is real. One of the cases I remember most clearly involved a doctor. I can still picture the scene, even though I wish I couldn't. The photos showed him in his bedroom, in his own bed, and it was obvious something violent had happened. It wasn't the kind of death you could brush off as natural. It was the kind of death that immediately tells you there was fear, panic, and pain in that room. And even though the investigation went through the normal process, even though people looked at the evidence and tried to piece together the story, there was one thing I couldn't shake. I still believe his wife did it. I know how that sounds. I know it's a serious thing to say. But when you work around cases like that, you start learning how to read a room through photographs. You start noticing small things that other people might miss. The way objects are positioned. The way the scene looks too clean in certain spots, like something was moved. The way it doesn't match the story someone tells afterward. You begin to develop a gut feeling that isn't based on superstition, but on pattern recognition. And the worst part is, gut feelings don't hold up in court. You can believe something with every fiber of your body, but if you can't prove it, then the case stays in that gray area. And that's what haunted me about it. Because I wasn't looking at a movie. I was looking at a real person who had lived a real life, who had worked hard enough to become a doctor, who had a home, a bed, a family, and then suddenly he was gone in one of the most violent ways possible. And the person most likely responsible might have been the person who slept beside him, but nobody could prove it. That thought stays with you because it forces you to realize something terrifying. Sometimes the truth is obvious to everyone in the room, but without that one missing piece of evidence, the system can't touch it. People walk away. Lives move on. And the dead don't get justice. Then there was another case that was even harder to deal with, not because it was emotionally complicated, but because it was just horrifying in the most raw physical way. We were looking at evidence images involving a body stuffed into the trunk of a car. It wasn't staged for dignity. It wasn't treated like a human being. It was treated like an object someone was trying to hide. Like trash someone wanted to dispose of. What made it worse was how confusing it looked at first. The body was positioned in such a twisted way that at first glance, you couldn't even tell what you were looking at. The room went quiet because nobody wanted to say it out loud. Everyone's eyes were scanning the photo, trying to make sense of it. And there was this horrible moment where you realize the human body is not meant to be seen like that. It's not meant to be folded into spaces like luggage. It's not meant to be reduced to a puzzle. And I remember pointing out a detail that confirmed the orientation, and the moment it clicked, the mood in the room changed instantly. It wasn't relief, it was the opposite. It was the sick realization that, yes, this is real. This is a real person. And somebody did this on purpose. That was the part that always got me. Not just the violence, but the intention behind it. Someone made choices. Someone did action step by step. Someone decided to treat another human being like that. Someone decided to take a life, and then decided the next step was to hide the remains like it was nothing. When you see things like that, it does something to your brain. People always assume the hardest part about seeing crime photos is the gore, but honestly, that's not even the part that stays with you the longest. The hardest part is the way it changes how you look at the world, the way it makes you realize how close evil can be to normal life, how someone can be driving next to you on the highway, smiling at you in traffic, while carrying something horrible in the trunk of their car. How someone can look like a normal neighbor, a normal spouse, a normal coworker, while hiding a secret that would destroy everyone around them. And the craziest part is, in an office like that, this wasn't some once-in-a-career event. It was part of the job. Not every day, but often enough that you couldn't pretend it was rare. It was just another folder, another case number, another file that had to be stored correctly, backed up, protected, and prepared for court. That's the part most people don't understand. The people who work around the justice system aren't always hardened detectives or crime scene investigators. Sometimes it's regular office staff. Sometimes it's tech people. Sometimes it's the person you'd expect to be fixing printers and managing servers. And yet, they're still exposed to the same darkness. The kind of darkness that sticks to you even after you clock out. I've met a lot of people who love true crime shows, who think they're fascinated by it, who say they could handle seeing real crime scene photos, but I promise they couldn't. Not because they're weak, but because it's not entertainment when it's real. When it's real, you don't just see the scene. You feel it. You imagine the fear. You imagine the final moments. You imagine the silence afterward. And once your brain records those images, it doesn't delete them. It files them away. And sometimes late at night, when you're alone, when the house is quiet and you're trying to sleep, those images come back like they were burned into the back of your eyelids. That's why I always say this is stuff 99.99% of people will never see. And honestly, that's probably a good thing. Because once you've seen it, you don't fully go back to normal. You might go back to your job. You might go back to your life. You might laugh with your family and go out to dinner and act fine. But somewhere in the back of your mind, you'll always know what human beings are capable of. And that knowledge changes you. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. She told me this happened to a friend of a friend. And honestly, I still don't know if it was true or not. But the story felt so real, so detailed, that it genuinely kept me awake for days. Even now, years later, it still makes my stomach turn just thinking about it. This happened during a trip to Amsterdam, at least that's what I remember her saying. The girl in the story had gone out with her friends for a night of clubbing. It was supposed to be one of those carefree nights where you dance, laugh, drink, and forget about life for a while. She was having fun, feeling confident, and enjoying the energy of the place. At some point during the night, a guy approached her. She described him as handsome, charming, the type of person who seems easy to talk to. The kind of man who makes you feel like you've known him longer than you actually have. He was funny, smooth, and he knew exactly what to say. He didn't come off as creepy or desperate. He seemed relaxed, playful, and safe. And that's the scary part. Because most people expect danger to look like danger. But sometimes it doesn't. They started flirting, dancing, getting closer, and before long the situation became intense. Eventually they ended up in the bathroom. Things moved fast. They kissed, and it wasn't just a quick kiss either. It was the kind of moment where everything feels heated and impulsive. She did things with him in there, not full sex, but enough that it was intimate and serious. At the time, it probably felt exciting. like one of those wild stories you laugh about later with your friends. After that, the guy leaned in and told her she should come back to his place. He made it sound casual, almost like it was the obvious next step, like the night was still young and they should continue what they started. And she, caught up in the adrenaline and the thrill of it, actually considered it. Not just considered it. She was ready to go. But before leaving, she did something smart. She ran back to her friends. She wanted to let them know she was leaving with this guy. She wasn't sneaking off or disappearing. She told them she was going with him and that she'd see them later. Her friends reacted the way friends should. They didn't scream at her or judge her, but one of them immediately got serious. The friend told her she needed to get his name and his address, not in a controlling way, but in a protective way. Her friend said something like, just in case. The world is full of crazy people. It wasn't meant to ruin the mood, but it was common sense. It was the kind of warning people give when they care about you. So the girl went back to the guy, and she asked him for his information. It wasn't a strange request. It wasn't even aggressive. It was a normal safety question. She wanted to know where they were going and who he was. The kind of thing any smart person would ask if they were about to leave with a stranger in a foreign city. But the second she asked, his entire personality shifted. Instead of smiling or laughing it off, he became defensive. Not just slightly annoyed, but aggressively defensive. His face changed. His body language changed. It was like someone flipped a switch inside him. He questioned why she needed to know. He acted like she was accusing him of something. His tone became sharp. He got angry, fast. And her friend was standing right there, watching. The girl, now feeling uneasy, tried to calm things down. She didn't want a fight. She didn't want drama. She tried to make it light, to make it seem like a joke. She said maybe she could take a picture with him, just as a funny memory. Something harmless. She even framed it like it was cute, like she just wanted to remember the first guy she was ever brave enough to follow home on the first night. But that didn't calm him down. It made him worse. He started cursing at them. Not playful swearing, but angry, bitter words. He looked at them with pure hostility. Then, without another word, he turned around and walked away, disappearing into the crowd like he had never existed. The girl and her friend just stood there in shock. A moment ago, he had been charming, smiling, seductive. Now he had reacted like a cornered animal. His anger wasn't normal. It wasn't the reaction of someone who felt rejected or embarrassed. It was the reaction of someone who was hiding something. They spent the rest of the night trying to process what had happened. The girl felt shaken, but also relieved. She kept thinking, maybe she just avoided something bad. Maybe she dodged a bullet. They tried to convince themselves that he was just weird, maybe paranoid, maybe someone who didn't like being questioned. But deep down, she knew his reaction was wrong. Fast forward a few days. The trip ended, and she went home. Life started to return to normal. She probably told her friends about the strange guy and laughed nervously about it. She may have even wondered what could have happened if she had gone with him. Then she started feeling sick. At first, it was mild. Just a sore throat. Maybe fatigue. The kind of thing you assume is just a cold from staying out late, drinking, and being around crowds. She didn't think much of it. But it didn't go away. It got worse. Her throat became extremely painful. She started feeling weak. She couldn't ignore it anymore. So she went to her doctor. When the doctor examined her throat, the doctor immediately looked concerned. It wasn't the normal kind of inflammation you see with a common infection. The doctor told her it didn't look like regular pharyngitis. Something about it looked abnormal, even disturbing. The doctor decided to take a swab and send it to the lab for testing. The girl went home, still feeling sick, still not knowing what was happening. Then, a few days later, her doctor called her. And the call was not normal. The doctor didn't sound calm. The doctor didn't sound like someone giving ordinary test results. Instead, the doctor sounded scared, serious, almost shaken. The doctor told her that the lab results were terrifying. They had found bacteria in her throat that was not commonly found in living patients. The doctor said it was bacteria usually found on dead bodies. That one sentence alone is enough to make your blood run cold. The girl didn't understand at first. She thought maybe it was some medical misunderstanding or some rare infection. But the doctor made it clear this wasn't just unusual. It was suspicious. Soon after, the police got involved. The girl was questioned, not casually, but seriously. They treated it as something that could be connected to a crime. They needed to know how she could have been exposed to that type of bacteria. They needed to know where she had been, who she had been with, and what she had done. Imagine how horrifying that must have been. You go to the doctor expecting antibiotics, and suddenly you're being investigated like a criminal because your body is carrying bacteria linked to corpses. They asked her about her recent travels. They asked about people she had met. They asked about any strange encounters. And that's when she remembered him, the charming man from the club, the man who turned violent the moment she asked for his name and address. She told them everything she could remember. She described his face, his voice, his accent, if she could recall it, his clothing, where they met, what he said, and how he reacted when questioned. She explained how he disappeared into the crowd after cursing at her. The police took it seriously. They didn't treat it like some random hookup story. They acted like she had given them an important lead. And then, weeks later, the truth came out. The man was arrested. And when they searched his place, what they found was beyond horrifying. According to the story, they discovered the remains of 5 women, not just bodies. They were cut into pieces, and the details were so disgusting and disturbing that even repeating them made people sick. The police found evidence that he had been doing this repeatedly. He wasn't someone who snapped once. He was a predator, someone who had been hunting. The story said he would go to clubs and bars, just like the one where she met him. He would play the role of the charming stranger. He would make women feel safe. He would make them feel desired. He would make them think they were in control. And once he got them alone, he would kill them. Then he would dismember them, and he would continue doing things to their bodies after they were dead. The girl realized something that made her feel like she couldn't breathe. She was supposed to be the 6th. If her friend hadn't insisted on asking for his information, she would have gone with him. She would have walked right into his trap, smiling, thinking she was just going to have a wild night. Instead, her friend's instinct saved her life. That was the part of the story that hit the hardest. Not just that a killer existed, but that he was so good at pretending. He wasn't obviously dangerous. He wasn't a stranger lurking in the shadows. He was the guy everyone would trust. And she had been minutes away from being alone with him. Even though she survived physically, the damage didn't end there. She still had to deal with the infection. She still had to deal with police questioning. And worst of all, she had to deal with the fact that she had come close to becoming another missing woman on the news. According to the story, she went into therapy after that. Not for a few sessions. For years. Because how do you recover from realizing you almost died without even knowing you were in danger? How do you trust anyone again after learning that someone can smile at you, kiss you, and talk sweetly, while secretly carrying something dark enough to destroy your life? Even years later, she struggled to return to a normal social life, and going to clubs became impossible. Meeting new people felt dangerous. Even a stranger's smile could trigger fear. Because she knew, in a way most people don't, that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the kind of man you'd feel lucky to meet. And that's why this story stayed with me. Not because of the gore, not because of the crime itself, but because it showed how close danger can get, how easily someone can step toward death while thinking they're stepping toward fun, and how one small moment of common sense can mean the difference between waking up the next morning or never being seen again. My mom told me this story about a month ago, and I swear it felt like the floor dropped out from under me. The kind of story that doesn't just creep you out for a few minutes, it sticks to you. It changes the way you look at normal things like a shower, a hallway, or the sound of someone knocking at the door. The craziest part is that it wasn't some random haunted house rumor or small town gossip. It was real. It happened in the house I grew up in, the house my parents still live in right now. And for 14 years, I had no idea. It started before my parents ever owned the place. Back then, another family lived there, and like most families, they were trying to improve their home. They decided to remodel the master bathroom. It wasn't a quick one-day project either. It was a full remodel that lasted almost 2 weeks. For 2 weeks straight, workers were in and out of the house, carrying tools, moving materials, making noise, and doing what contractors normally do. The family didn't think much of it. Why would they? Remodeling's stressful, but it's normal. You hire a crew, you trust them, and you assume they're there to do a job and leave. That's how most people live. You don't assume someone you hired is watching you like prey. But according to what my mom said, 2 men on that remodeling crew weren't just working. They were studying the family. They paid attention to everything. Who woke up first? Who left the house? When the kids went to school? When the husband went to work? When the wife was alone? When the doors were locked? When they weren't? They watched the way the family moved through their own home, like the house was already theirs. And the most disturbing part is that the family never noticed. Not once. The family never got a weird feeling. They never thought the workers were acting suspicious. They never felt like they were being stared at too long or followed or observed. Nothing stood out. These men blended in so perfectly that the family didn't feel a single alarm bell go off. Somewhere during those 2 weeks, the men stole a key. Not by force, not by breaking in. They stole it quietly, the way a predator steals time and opportunity. And once they had it, they made copies. They created their own way into the house, their own access, their own plan, all while smiling, working, and acting normal. It makes my skin crawl thinking about it. The idea that someone can be standing in your home, holding your tools, talking politely, maybe even laughing with you while secretly planning something horrific. After nearly 2 weeks of work, they had the family's routine memorized. They knew what a typical weekday looked like. They knew when the house would be full and when it would be empty. They knew when the wife would be alone. Then the remodel was finished. The bathroom looked beautiful. Fresh tile, clean walls, new fixtures. The kind of renovation that makes you feel proud of your home. The kind of thing that makes you think, finally, something good. The next day was just a normal weekday. The kids went off to school. The husband went to work. The wife stayed home. Nothing about that morning seemed strange. No warning. No strange phone calls. No unusual cars sitting outside. No shadow at the window. Just another day in a quiet neighborhood. At some point, the wife decided to take a shower. She wanted to enjoy the brand new bathroom they had just paid for. She walked into the newly remodeled master bathroom, turned on the water, and immediately noticed something was wrong. The water pressure wasn't right. It wasn't working the way it should. It was the kind of small inconvenience that happens all the time after a remodel. Something that would normally just be annoying. She probably thought, great, they messed something up. She didn't panic. She didn't think she was in danger. She just decided to use the shower upstairs instead. That decision, something so small and innocent, ended up being the only reason she survived. Because while she was upstairs trying to shower like normal, those two men came back. They didn't knock. They didn't sneak around the back. They walked straight through the front door like they belonged there. Because in a way, they had made themselves belong. They had the key. They had access. They had already been inside that home for 2 weeks, learning everything about it. The house was quiet, empty. The kids were gone. The husband was gone. It was the perfect moment. They moved through the home like they were following a script they had rehearsed. They weren't there to steal a TV or grab jewelry. They weren't there for a quick robbery. They were there for something much worse. They found her upstairs. And what happened next was brutal. They attacked her in the shower in the most vulnerable place a person can be. In a moment where she couldn't run, couldn't fight properly, couldn't even fully understand what was happening until it was too late. The violence didn't stop there. My mom said they smashed her head against the tile wall, over and over, hard enough to make her collapse, hard enough that they thought she was dead. They left her there and ran, believing they had finished what they came to do. The only reason she didn't die was pure luck, not luck in a magical way. Luck in the cruelest way, where a small detail changes everything. The neighbors saw them. They noticed the men leaving the house, rushing out like they were in a panic. They noticed the front door left open. That alone was strange. People don't leave their front door open and run off like that, not unless something happened. The neighbors watched them get into their car. They sped away. And the neighbors knew immediately that something was wrong. That instinct, that tiny moment of suspicion, saved her life. They went to the house. They called for help. They got inside. They found her. She was alive, barely, but alive. She survived. I can't even imagine what it would feel like to wake up after something like that. To realize the people you trusted with your home had turned it into a trap. To realize that your own bathroom, your own shower, the place you thought was safe, had become the scene of a nightmare. Even though she lived, she didn't just walk away from it. She had to live with it. She had to live with the memory of being attacked in her own house. She had to live with the sound of footsteps in a hallway, the sound of the front door opening, the idea that someone could watch you for 2 weeks and you wouldn't even notice. And the trauma didn't stay in the bathroom. It poisoned the entire home. After that, the family couldn't stay there. They couldn't look at the walls the same way. They couldn't sleep comfortably. They couldn't relax. Every room probably felt haunted. Not by ghosts, but by the memory of what happened. They put the house up for sale. They left. About a year later, the house sold. To my parents. That part is the one that made me feel sick when my mom told me. Because my parents didn't buy it knowing what had happened. They just saw a house, a good neighborhood, a decent price, a place to raise kids. They saw a future. They didn't see the past. And then we moved in. I lived in that house for 14 years. 14 years of birthdays, holidays, late-night snacks, school mornings, and family arguments. 14 years of normal life, and the entire time I didn't know. The shower where the attack happened was my shower. That shower wasn't just some unused guest bathroom. It was the one I used almost every day. The place where I got ready for school. The place where I washed off sweat after playing outside. The place where I stood alone thinking I was completely safe. And I never knew what had happened there. My parents never told me or my siblings. When we moved in, we were little kids, and honestly, I understand why they kept it from us back then. No parent wants to put that kind of fear into a child's mind. No parent wants their kids to be afraid of their own home. But what shocked me was that they never told us when we got older. They never sat us down when we were teenagers or adults and said, "Hey, there's something you should know." They kept it buried. Maybe they thought it was better that way. Maybe they didn't want to reopen the wound. Maybe they wanted the house to feel normal for us. Maybe they didn't want to make us feel like we were living in a place touched by something horrible. But when my mom finally told me, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I couldn't stop imagining it. Suddenly, every memory of that bathroom felt different. The tile, the walls, the drain, the sound of water hitting the floor, the way the door clicked shut, the way the steam fogged the mirror. All of it became darker in my mind, like the house itself had been hiding a secret from me. And the worst part is, it wasn't even just history. It was the idea that this could happen to anyone. That it wasn't some random stranger breaking in. It was someone invited inside. Someone trusted. Someone paid to work on the home. That's what made it feel so disturbing. Because you can lock your doors at night. You can install cameras. You can buy an alarm system. But how do you protect yourself from the people you let in? How do you know who is watching you while they're standing right there, smiling at you, working on your home like everything is normal? My parents only told us recently because there have been a lot of break-ins in their neighborhood lately. More than usual. People have been getting scared. There's been talk on the street. People sharing warnings, checking their locks twice, paying attention to unfamiliar cars. And it reminded them of what happened in that house years ago. That was when they finally decided it was time to tell us. But I'll be honest, I don't understand how they could ever forget. How could you live in a house knowing that happened there? How could you walk past that bathroom and not think about it? How could you hear the shower running and not feel your stomach twist? Maybe they didn't forget. Maybe they just learned how to bury it. Maybe they trained themselves to push it into a locked corner of their mind because if they didn't, they wouldn't be able to live there. Maybe that was the only way they could keep going. But now that I know, I can't unknow it. Every time I visit my parents' house, I look at it differently. I look at the front door differently. I look at the neighborhood differently. I look at the upstairs hallway differently. And that bathroom doesn't feel like just a bathroom anymore. It feels like proof. Proof that a home can be beautiful, clean, warm, and filled with family memories, and still have something rotten buried inside its history. Proof that evil doesn't always come in the form of a stranger hiding in the dark. Sometimes evil comes wearing a work uniform. Sometimes it carries tools. Sometimes it smiles and says, "Don't worry, ma'am. We'll have it finished soon." And you believe them, because you don't want to live in a world where you can't. Even now, what scares me the most is imagining how easily it could have happened again. How easily those men could have come back another day. How easily they could have waited longer, studied the family more, and done even worse. The only reason it ended the way it did was because of one tiny mistake. The water pressure in the master shower. If the water had worked normally, she would have been in the downstairs bathroom, hidden from view, hidden from neighbors, hidden from anyone who might have noticed something wrong. That one small problem, something she probably cursed under her breath, was the reason she lived. And the thought of that makes me feel sick, because it reminds me how fragile safety really is. How one small decision, one small inconvenience, can be the difference between life and death. When my mom finished telling me the story, I remember just sitting there in silence. I couldn't even speak at first. I felt like my mind was trying to protect me by refusing to fully picture it. But the images came anyway, creeping in like a shadow. And I kept thinking about the years I lived there. All the showers I took. All the times I was home alone as a teenager. All the nights my parents went out and left us sleeping in that house. And I never knew. My parents still live there today. The house is still standing. The neighborhood is still quiet. People still mow their lawns and wave at each other like nothing bad could ever happen. But now I know the truth. I know that sometimes the most terrifying stories aren't the ones that happen in abandoned buildings or remote woods. Sometimes they happen in a normal house, in a normal neighborhood, behind a front door that looks just like everyone else's. And sometimes you can live in that house for 14 years, using that same shower almost every day, and never realize you've been standing in the exact place where someone else's nightmare happened. That's the part that keeps replaying in my head. Not the house, not the bathroom, not even the remodel. Just the idea that for so long, I was living inside a story I didn't even know I was part of. My dad told me this story a while ago, and even though I don't remember any of it myself, it still messed with my head. Mostly because it wasn't like some random ghost story he heard online or something he wanted to scare me with. He told it in a calm voice, like it was just something that happened, and he never really found a good explanation for it. The more details he gave me, the more it felt like one of those situations where the truth is somehow worse than the imagination. Because it didn't sound like a haunted house movie. It sounded like a normal family stuck in something they didn't understand. When I was a baby, we lived in this huge apartment complex. My dad described it like one of those big places with long hallways, lots of identical units, and that slightly stale, echoing feeling you get in buildings where hundreds of people have lived and moved out over the years. The kind of place where you always hear footsteps above you, doors closing somewhere down the hall, muffled voices through thin walls, and pipes making noises at night. Even if nothing paranormal is happening, those kinds of buildings can still feel unsettling sometimes, especially when you're alone. My room was small, like a typical baby room in an apartment, and there was a closet in the corner, a regular closet, nothing fancy. But the door was strange. My dad said it wasn't just closed. It was nailed shut, not locked, not stuck, literally nailed shut, like someone didn't want it open. And it was obvious, too, because you could see where it had been painted over. Like somebody had tried to hide the fact that the door had been messed with. But they didn't do a perfect job. There were little uneven spots where the nails were, and the paint looked thicker around the edges. My dad told me when they first moved in, he noticed it right away. It stood out because it didn't make sense. Closets are meant to be used. Nobody nails a closet shut unless there's a reason. But at the time, he said he didn't think too deeply about it. People do weird things in apartments. Maybe the previous tenant had kids and didn't want them crawling inside. Maybe the landlord did it because something was broken. Maybe there was mold or a leak. There are plenty of normal explanations, and when you're busy raising a baby and trying to settle into a new place, you don't want to jump straight to the creepy option. But then the weird part started. Apparently during the day, I was completely fine in that room. I could be in there all day long, no problem. I'd nap, play, do normal baby stuff. Nothing unusual. Nothing that made my parents think anything was wrong. But at night, it was like something changed. My dad said as soon as it got dark, I would start freaking out. Not just crying like a baby who doesn't want to sleep. He said it was different. Like panic. Like fear. Like something was wrong in a way that even a baby could feel. I would scream and cry and wouldn't settle down no matter what they did. They could feed me, change me, rock me, try music, try silence, try everything. It didn't matter. The only thing that worked was moving me into their room. And the moment they moved me, I would calm down. My dad said that was what made it stand out. Babies cry, sure, but this felt like the room itself was the problem. Like the second I was away from that corner closet, away from that space, something lifted. It wasn't just bedtime fussiness. It was like I couldn't tolerate being in that room at night. It happened over and over again. At first, my parents probably tried to ignore it, thinking it was just a phase. But after a while, it got to the point where it wasn't something you could shrug off. When you're a parent and your baby is crying like that, you feel helpless. You start thinking maybe something is physically wrong. Maybe the air is bad. Maybe there's a sound you can't hear. Maybe the room is colder at night. Maybe something's scaring the baby. But then my grandmother came over. My dad said my grandmother was the kind of person who believed in things most people would laugh at. She considered herself a medium. She said she could sense things, feel energy, feel presences. My dad didn't always take it seriously, but he respected her. And she had a reputation in the family for picking up on things that other people couldn't. When she came to visit, my dad decided to tell her about what had been happening. He pointed out the closet door, and he said she stared at it for a long time. Not like she was curious, like she was suspicious of it, like she could feel something through the wood. That was when my dad decided to pry it open. It wasn't easy, because nails aren't meant to be removed quickly. But he managed to get the door open enough for someone to step inside. And my grandmother, being who she was, he didn't hesitate. She walked toward the closet like she wanted to prove something, but the second she stepped into it, everything changed. My dad said she almost fell over, like her legs suddenly gave out. She had to be helped out of the closet because she couldn't even steady herself. It wasn't a dramatic act. It was like her body just reacted without her permission. Her face went pale, her eyes got wide, and she looked genuinely confused and shaken, like she didn't expect it to hit her that hard. But the strangest part was what happened next. The moment she left the closet, she was fine, completely fine. Not dizzy, not sick, not weak, just normal again, like nothing had happened. It was like the closet itself had grabbed her and thrown her off balance, and the second she stepped out, it let go. When my dad asked her what she felt, she described it in a way that still gives me chills. She said it felt like the entire room was spinning at an extreme speed, like being trapped in a violent whirlpool, except it wasn't the room physically moving. It was the sensation of motion, like something was twisting reality around her. She said it was overwhelming, disorienting, and almost impossible to stand upright. And while she was feeling that spinning sensation, she said there was an evil presence looming over her. Not beside her. Over her. Like something tall and heavy, watching from above. My dad told me, she said, it wasn't just creepy. It was malicious. Like the energy in there didn't want her there. Like it was warning her. After that, my parents were done pretending it was nothing. That's when my dad called someone he knew, a guy he referred to as the Mushroom Man. Even hearing that name makes the whole story sound ridiculous, like something out of a weird urban legend. But my dad said this guy was known for doing cleansings. Not a priest, not a therapist, not an official anything. Just a man people called when they believed something wasn't right in their home. The Mushroom Man came to the apartment and did a cleansing of the entire room, especially the closet. My dad didn't explain every detail of what he did, but he described it like the guy had his own methods. He walked around the room, said things, did some kind of ritual, and focused heavily on the closet like it was the center of the problem. And for a while, it worked. My dad said things got calmer. Nights were better. I could sleep. The air didn't feel as heavy. The fear in that room seemed to fade, like whatever had been there was pushed back. But it didn't last. After some time, the same problem returned. Night after night, I would lose it again, screaming, crying, panicking. And again, the only way to calm me down was to move me into my parents' room. It was like the room became two different places depending on the time of day. In the daylight, it was normal. At night, it felt wrong. My dad said that was when he finally went to the people who ran the apartment complex and asked them a question most tenants never asked. He asked who lived there before us. At first, the staff didn't want to talk. Landlords never want to discuss the past, but eventually someone told him. The previous tenant was an old woman, and apparently she wasn't well. She had severe schizophrenia, and she also had dementia. My dad said the way they described it made it sound like she had been a very troubled person, someone who probably lived in confusion and fear. Someone who may have believed she was being watched. Someone who might have talked to things that weren't there. Someone who might have suffered in that apartment, especially in that room. Hearing that didn't solve anything, but it made the closet door make more sense. Maybe she had nailed it shut herself. Maybe she thought something was inside it. Or maybe she thought something was trying to get out. And that thought alone is terrifying. My dad called the Mushroom Man again. He came back, did another cleansing, did everything he could, but this time, it didn't work. My dad said nothing changed. The energy didn't lift. The nights stayed bad. The feeling stayed heavy. That was when my dad started looking for a different kind of answer. Something physical. Something practical. Because even if the spiritual explanation felt real, he still wanted to believe there was something logical behind it. Something that could be fixed. That's when he did something weird. He got a drain snake. Not because of the closet, not because of the room, but because he started thinking about the plumbing. He snaked the drains in the bathroom and pulled out everything he could. And what came out was disgusting. My dad said there was an unbelievable amount of hair in the drains, like years of buildup. The kind of clogged mess you'd expect in a place where an old person lived alone and nobody cleaned anything properly. It wasn't just a little bit. It was packed in there like it had been collecting forever. He cleaned it all out, every last bit. And right after that, everything stopped. Just like that. No more nighttime panic. No more screaming. No more feeling that the room was wrong. It was over. And my dad said it never happened again. That part is what makes the story so disturbing. Because it raises so many questions. Was it really spiritual? Was it something physical affecting the air quality? Was there some kind of smell or gas buildup? Or was there mold trapped in the walls? Was there something about the drains that made the room feel suffocating at night? Or was it something darker? Was the closet just the focus, while the drains were the real anchor? Like something was attached to the filth, to the buildup, to the remains of the old woman's life. Something that stayed behind in the apartment like a stain you can't see. My dad also told me something else, and honestly, this is the detail that creeps me out the most. He said when he would be sitting at the computer, he'd sometimes see movement out of the corner of his eye. He'd glance up expecting to see me or my mom or maybe just a shadow. But what he would see was a tall man. Not normal tall, unnaturally tall. A figure wearing a tall hat, like an old-fashioned top hat. My dad said it reminded him of Abraham Lincoln. That kind of silhouette. Long coat, tall frame, tall hat. And the figure would be walking calmly from room to room. Not rushing, not floating. Walking. Like it lived there. Like it belonged there. And every time my dad would turn his head fully to look, it would be gone. Just vanished. But the feeling didn't vanish. The sense of being watched stayed behind. He said he would also feel eyes watching him from the ceiling vent. The apartment had one of those high vents near the ceiling, the kind you barely notice unless you're staring up. But he said sometimes he would feel it so strongly that he couldn't focus on what he was doing, like something was behind him, above him, staring down. That kind of feeling's hard to explain unless you've experienced it. The sensation that you're not alone even when you know you are. That pressure in the back of your neck. That instinct that tells you to turn around. My dad said he'd feel it constantly in that apartment, especially at night. And then there's the closet. That closet door nailed shut, painted over, like it was never meant to be open. Even after the drains were cleaned and everything calmed down, my dad said he never felt fully comfortable with that closet. He didn't like standing near it. He didn't like being in that corner. He said even though the panic stopped, he still felt like something about that space wasn't normal. Like the apartment had a memory. Like the walls remember. Like the air remembers. When he told me all of this, I asked him why he didn't move out immediately, and he just shrugged. He said, when you're young, broke, and raising a baby, you don't always have the option to run. Sometimes you just survive it. You do what you can. You fix what you can. You try to make it through the month. But hearing the story as an adult is different, because now I can picture it. I can imagine being a parent and hearing your baby scream every night like it's terrified of something you can't see. I can imagine opening a closet door that was nailed shut and watching my grandmother nearly collapse the moment she steps inside. I can imagine calling some strange man to cleanse a room because you've run out of logical explanations. And I can imagine sitting alone at a computer late at night, seeing a tall, shadowy man with a top hat walking down the hallway out of the corner of your eye. And I think the scariest part is this. If my dad never snaked those drains, if he never pulled out all that hair, would it have ever stopped? Or would it have gotten worse? Would the fear have grown stronger? Would that presence have become clearer? Would the closet have become something else entirely? I'll never know. But I do know this. Every time I walk into an old apartment building now, especially one with long hallways and strange smells and vents high up on the walls, I think about that closet door, the nails, the paint, the way someone tried to seal it shut like they were locking something away. And I think about the fact that as a baby, I didn't have words to explain what I felt. I could only scream. Maybe I wasn't crying for no reason. Maybe I was crying because something in that room was there with me every night, standing quietly in the dark, watching from the corner, waiting for the lights to go out. And maybe the only reason I'm not haunted by it today is because my dad, without even realizing it, finally cleaned out whatever was feeding it, or whatever was hiding in the pipes, or whatever was trapped behind that nailed-shut door. Because some things don't leave on their own. Sometimes they have to be pulled out. If you're still here, then these stories didn't simply fade away. They settled in. Every story you heard tonight came from real moments, real people, and real situations where something felt off or nearly went wrong. If you want to keep exploring stories that linger in your thoughts long after the night grows quiet, consider subscribing to Midnight Whispers. There are more stories waiting in the dark, and not all of them let you leave in time.